Gary DePaul with Unlabeled Leadership. Welcome to episode 36. Don Snyder shares stories of accountability, innovation, and real change. I'd like to welcome listeners from Puerto Rico, Russia, Piedmont, Italy, Vienna, Austria, Madrid, Spain, England, and Wales. With that, let's get started. Dawn is one of the top instructional system design or talent development experts that I know. She has deep skills in performance improvement, change management, and strategic initiatives. When Dawn isn't consulting with large companies and organizations, she is on the faculty of Boise State University and Franklin University, where she practices stewardship, giving back her knowledge and her experiences to students to get them started in the field of instructional systems design. Also, she's a fellow blogger on the HPT Treasures website. HPT is Human Performance Technology, and HPT Treasures is a site that has more than 600 complementary resources related to performance improvement. Oh, on the website, you can find a video recording of Dawn talking about her career, and I'll add a link in the show notes. Part 1, The Rose in the Field. With performance consulting, ethics plays a crucial role in what you do. You need to continuously evaluate if you're adding value for your clients in large organizations or small organizations. Sometimes, though, as a consultant, you're brought in for the wrong reasons. When that happens, you have to figure out what's best for that organization, whether you continue, renegotiate what you do, or step away. Dawn describes a situation that falls in this area of ethics, and she shares how she deals with it. Here's Dawn telling her story.
Throughout my career, one of the things I've always brought to my clients is strategy. And it's always been interesting when I talk to colleagues or when I talk to fellow faculty. How do we teach students? How do we teach emerging talent? How do we explain where strategy comes from? For me, I learned strategy at my father's knee. Dad came from a family of farmers. And you wouldn't normally think of farmers perhaps as strategists, but farmers have to be innovative. They have to be very, very conscious of their environment. There's a lot of compliance issues. So farming is actually a very complex activity that requires a lot of strategic acumen. I would always, as I grew up in my consulting practice, I would look to my father for strategic advice. So I can remember it was a summer day, it was getting towards evening, and I was really struggling with an issue that I encountered with my company. So I had taken on this really cool project with a brand new client. I wanted to get into this organization because there's a big player here in the Columbus area. I was excited to do this work. It was quite a large project. I had 5 folks in there full-time working. As we began to do the analysis work to create this curriculum, we started noticing these, I guess I'd call them into a lot of boring detail. There were things like, you go in and you start looking for resources, and some of the other functional silos, some of the other leaders we were working with started kind of withholding those resources. It was like a little game of keep away. We needed to get those resources to do our work, but we're not going to let you have them. And there were people that would just not be available in the time frame that we needed them to. So as we began to nose around, one of the things that we learned is that the leader that we were reporting to, the sponsor of this project, was kind of using this process and the products from the work that we were doing as a way to disadvantage another leader in the organization who was his competition for promotion into a different role. We were in a situation where, what on earth were we going to do? I took this to my father, who, as I said, was one of the wisest people that I knew. And conversations with my father can go a lot of different ways, and sometimes would end up with very specific advice and a spreadsheet and anything else that I might need to work through the implementation. And So I was explaining this situation. I said, Dad, I really don't know what to do next. We're having trouble moving forward. I'm concerned about moving forward under these circumstances. And he kind of looked off into the horizon and he said to me, Dawn, a rose in a cornfield is a weed.
Yeah.
Well, I was completely taken aback. I didn't want a rose in a cornfield story. I wanted some specific advice about what I was supposed to do. I wanted it in a business context, right? I was kind of guilty of dismissing this when he first said it as really not very relevant to my situation. As I thought about it more, I really realized that it illuminated the critical role of context in the kind of practice we have as leaders, the kind of practice we have as consultants, because the context in which we do our work determines what good looks like. And we need to take that into account as we consider what the right thing to do is, because it can be situationally appropriate to do one thing versus another. The other thing about understanding that this was a context-related situation, and of course, I myself saw myself as the rose in that cornfield, was that it really also illuminated the choices that I had. So I really had two choices, because you can't be a weed. That's not something that can stand. I, as a rose in the cornfield, can do my best to camouflage myself as corn, to add value like corn adds value, and to disappear into that field in a way that makes sense. Or I can choose to repot myself and go into a different environment where the conditions are really better for my ability to thrive.
In a sense, what you're saying is that because of how this environment is, either you have to adapt to the environment and play along with it and try to overcome some of these challenges, and which come out as red flags, which are what clued you in, or you can dislodge yourself from it and try to move on to another situation. Is that it?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And it's really powerful, because instead of looking at the people involved in the situation, being able to abstract it into something that's much more organic and enduring really helped me understand that it was not necessarily the fault of anyone or anything. Perhaps it was mine, because I jumped into the situation without a real clear understanding of the context. But when you're joining an organization, whether to take a job or as a consultant, you think you know some things, but there are other things that are just unknowable until you actually begin to operate in that context.
Especially if you're going into an organization, you're on the outside, you don't know the players, and you're asked to, for example, in your case, develop a curriculum. Well, you have to work with the people. If you're getting resistance, if you're being shot down for whatever reason, then those are your red flags, and you have to sit there and say, okay, is this right? Do I need to really uncover what's going on here deeper, or do I need to back out?
And there's layers of leadership, I guess, in this story too, because, there's the leader in the organization who had an agenda that was very seriously disadvantaging somebody else, which for my values was problematic. Then I was a leader of a team who had made commitments to this project, to my organization, and then to the client organization, of their time and their talents and their livelihood for this period of time, at least, was at stake, as was, my ability to lead them into a good and successful performance situation. It's interesting, because the organic nature of what my dad told me has really become something that I've internalized. Not only the importance of context and paying a lot of attention to context, but also the idea that organizations and people in them are very organic creatures. And it's never just one way or another way. We might think of organizations as having permeable structures, but certainly in the post-COVID environment, we understand that inside organizations and between organizations and their customers and organizations and their vendors, these boundaries are becoming less and less structured. The context is much more of a driver than perhaps formal boundaries may have been in the past.
Knowing you, I'm guessing that one of your driving principles is to add value and not add value just to the client, but to the organization as a whole. I'm going to guess that you made a decision about how you want to proceed.
I did. It's the only client we've ever fired.
Yeah.
Now, that wasn't an out the gate. We didn't start there.
Mm-hmm.
What we did as a team is decide what our boundaries were going to be. And we decided that if we could not get these certain elements of the project aligned with the work that we needed to do, that we could not be successful. We worked to negotiate those elements with the project. If different stakeholders have extremely different ideas about what good looks like, and we're not in a position to get results or to add value or to partner effectively, sometimes, and again, very, very rarely, the right thing to do is to step away, is to say, this is a rose in a cornfield moment, not a stalk of wheat in a cornfield moment, or a different type of corn in a cornfield moment. We're going to go to find more fertile ground for the work that we do.
Part 2, innovation happens when it is safe to fail. If you want people in your organization to be innovative, you have to set up the right environment for that to occur. And that is not easy. If you have listened to past episodes, you might have heard me say something like, practicing leadership involves changing the environment so people can be at their best. If you want people to innovate, you have to change the environment. Dawn shares a leadership story that really gets at this. Here's Dawn now.
So most of my life, I have been a consultant, most of my professional life. But I took about 8 years in there and I worked for different organizations. And in 2017, I was recommitting to starting my business again. But I had been away for 8 years, and certainly the nature of doing business had changed. The gig economy was on the increase. And so I committed to a year of experimentation in starting my business. I knew what had made me successful as a business owner in the past, but I wanted to be purposeful about experimenting to see what was going to serve me best now, at this time in my life, at this time in our business environment, that kind of thing. So I was really lucky enough. I got a recommendation for a client from Judy Hale. And the client was Black Spectacles. And I have to tell you, they are one of the favorite companies I've ever worked with. And in part, it was because of the leader and the founder, Mark Tier. Black Spectacles is a company, they're essentially an educational software company. They support architects over the lifetime of their practice, how to become an architect and get licensed, and then how to grow in your career. They were contacting me because they have a series of educational videos and other materials. They have a curriculum to help newly minted folks prepare to take and pass the licensure exam that's required to practice architecture in the United States. And we were talking about, what does good look like for learning? Are there some strategies that are going to work better for these folks? And we started, of course, with the end in mind. It's like, what do you really want to accomplish? And what they really wanted to do in terms of, measurable results was to increase their subscribers' pass rates for this exam. So we did a performance analysis and we came up with a number of things that we felt would have an impact on that. Most of those were things that they could handle, barriers that they could remove, ways that they could make the access to their stuff more equitable, that kind of thing. But we also identified that they really could benefit from adding to their process a robust analysis methodology that would align to the content that was in these licensure exams, and that would also result in a way for them to manage the content that would go into the instructional assets that they created. So we were creating this curriculum essentially to be aligned, that would be, very quickly could result in development, and then was tracked in such a way that if there were changes to the test or the objectives of the test, they could make adjustments to their content without starting from scratch. I'm working essentially with a team of people who are in the education business, but they're not like many of my clients who have formal degrees in instructional design, instructional systems, adult education, or things like that. This is a group of folks who have other skill sets. I went in and we did basically, we planned for this part of the project. There were 6 weeks of work. And after each week, we would sit down and we'd have an after action review. And the team would review what went well and what didn't go well. They would identify areas where they could adjust and customize. And then they also identified things that had failed. And in 1 week, we had some significant failures. Some of the subject matter experts really weren't subject matter experts in the areas that were invited, that we were focusing on. They had different areas of expertise, but they really weren't ready to inform what we were doing. And we encountered some other things. But at the end of the cycle, we ended up with this really robust structure that was going to enable them to do work for the next, year or so. It's shown to be proven successful. But here's the point that I really want to make is that at the end of the series of things that we did, I wanted to ask them, why are you guys so successful? I watched this team grow and innovate in ways that some of the more mature and perhaps more prepared groups that I work with did not succeed in doing. And we decided it was really a couple of things. They're both related to leadership. One is that their leader gives them access to the resources and the information they need to do the work they've agreed to do. As the holder of the resources, Mark Tier, the leader, the founder and CEO of the company, makes sure they have, if they needed to do this, that was me. I was a consultant who came in. If they needed software, they had software. They had things like that. The other thing is related to innovation. And this is a really important point because a lot of my clients really, really talk a lot about innovation. But in order to truly innovate, people need to unlearn the stuff that they think they know that doesn't work anymore. They need to be able to try new things and have it be okay to try something new. Perhaps most importantly, they need to be able to fail and not be punished for it.
That, I think, is the 2020, 2021 challenge that people are realizing. It's very easy for people in executive positions to say, we want you to innovate. We want you to try stuff, and we want you to be okay if you fail. Oh, by the way, when you fail, I'm going to put that on your performance review. It's going to affect the business and blah, blah, blah. It's just like they want to say it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to try something. But then there's the old paradigm that sometimes creeps up that some organizations just hasn't figured out how to make it okay to try and fail and change fail to learn, make it a learning experience.
Well, I think you're so right. And one of the things that this leader did was they have weekly meetings where they're encouraged, actively encouraged. And I don't think I've been involved with some really outstanding and forward-thinking groups, but I don't know of another group that I've worked with that was as encouraged to say, here's what I did wrong this week, and here's how I'm going to fix it, and here's how I'm going to do better. To watch this team come together with something that was analysis was a new thing for them. To come together, to try to learn it, to try new things, to experiment, to sometimes fail. Sometimes they would take what they heard my advice to be, or I thought we were going to do something one way, and it didn't turn out as well as we thought it would. But I just saw the most remarkable growth that really paid off in the end. And I compare that to some other groups that I work with that talk a lot about innovation, and they have committees that are focused on innovation, but they don't have the resources to innovate and try new things. And they don't have the leadership support. They don't have that context. You can't ask people to, really work against your culture. All you get is incremental change. And then people understand that the barriers are very real and they can only do so much.
I think that what you just said was incredible. With this company, they're in a safe space to where they can say, here's what I did wrong. Here's what didn't work out this week. A lot of businesses, they don't have that. In fact, that what you might experience is finger pointing. Oh, it wasn't my fault. It was because I didn't get this resource. And, it's when you can't say, hey, there's a problem here, or, this isn't working out, that's how problems start to root and become something more cancerous, if that's the right word.
Well, I think it is, because if you can't nip it in the bud, it becomes a bigger thing. And sometimes the changes in your environment require you to innovate. And if that innovation isn't okay, then instead of really getting innovation, well, I have a lot of clients, honestly, who ask me to come in and help them get different results using the same process.
Mm.
And when I'll say that, I say, so you want me to work with your team so that this happens, but you're not willing to change these things that really create those conditions. And if you put it that way, of course, people are like, oh, no, that's not what I'm asking at all. But truthfully, we all do that. We're all, at some level change averse, because it means we're at risk. We have to do things differently. We have to learn new things. We're not as comfortable as we were yesterday if we're doing something new today. It does make a difference in organizations.
Yeah, I'm also hearing the accountability part. It's not just one person's is accountable for moving the group forward. It's everyone is accountable, where that means that I'm beginning to see that things aren't going well. Then it's my duty. It's part of my role to say, hey, this isn't working out, and work as a group to try to fix it, rather than wait till it explodes and blows up and, becomes a real problem. And then the finger pointing begins. I think I'm hearing a lot about self-accountability and accountable for the group.
I would have to agree with that. And I would also say it has something to do with, helping people do their work, empowering them to do their work. Some leaders come in and say, I'm smarter than all y'all, and I know I'm going to intuit what our customers want and tell you how to get there. Other leaders say, hey, we have to figure this out together. We're all responsible to make these things happen. And it's a completely different type of decision-making and problem-solving strategy that you see in those groups.
Yeah, and Mark Tier, the very first thing you were saying about him was that I'm going to read into what you said a little bit, Don. I think he not only gives access to resources and makes sure that you're set up for success, but at the same time, and I think you might have mentioned this earlier, it's that he would be a person that would remove barriers as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Listen to what the customers are saying to make sure that their barriers are removed as well. I mean, it's really very much, if you only pick some leadership principles and apply them, you can't get a full result, right? You can't say we want innovation, but I'm not going to empower you to innovate. I'm not going to give you resources to innovate. I'm not going to support your ability to try and fail. I'm going to command and control our relationship so that you have to stay in your box, because if you stay in your box, you can't innovate. So that's just one example of, we say we want something to happen, but to go back to my dad's advice about a flower in a cornfield, a leader is a person who's responsible to create that context. And if the leader wants X to happen and they're creating an environment where the performances that they want are not supported, or the supports that they need to give to individuals to help them get there are not provided, we're not going to get the results that we would like to have.
Hence, no innovation would happen.
No innovation. And of course, that affects performance too, because an organization's like a river. You step in it one day, it's one thing, you step out. And we've all seen that when leadership may change, right? And so the environment changes, and things that were okay or tolerated or even applauded today are punished, or vice versa. It can go either way. That's something that has to be created by leaders in the context of the environment of the work. So if you're in an industry with a lot of changes, then a leader has to be sensitive to that and making sure that the context that they're creating is going to grow, to stick with our organic model, is going to grow the kind of performances that they want growing in that garden.
If you're stuck in an old paradigm and you're trying to make minute changes towards a different direction, then you're not going to be able to make it. You have to really be full blown into moving in that direction, or fully committed, and give up some of the old ways of doing things in order to move in that direction.
I think that's true. And I think it's very hard. Things in our professional lifetime have changed much more quickly and much more substantially than those of perhaps a generation before us. And so, not only when we talk about change, I used to think about change as adding to what we do. Now I understand change is more transformative. We have to unlearn. There are some things that we have to take out of our playbook, as well as adding new things in. And that's a completely different way of thinking about change. It's not just we were going in a forward direction in a car, and now we're going to change our speed, or we're going to take a different route. No, we're not going by car anymore at all. We're taking a completely different mode of transportation, or perhaps we're going to a different destination. Little incremental changes,
They won't get you there.
they won't get you there. And leadership is absolutely critical. What a leader does or doesn't do is absolutely critical to making sure that the environment is right to get done what needs to be done.
Part 3, everything you do is an intervention. People who practice leadership are thoughtful and deliberate about how they act around other people. They frequently think about the principles that drive their behaviors and often reflect about what they've done during the day, almost like a self-assessment. Don shares some advice to help us think about our actions. Again, here's Don.
So, Gary, we've been talking today a lot about context and the role of context in the behaviors that you use as a leader, and how the choices that you make such a difference in creating an environment in which people can be their most productive, or they can be their most innovative, right? One of the things that I would recommend as a takeaway to leaders, or really professionals who want to look at their practice, is that everything you do is an intervention. Everything you do is an intervention. And that is actually a consulting principle, a process consulting principle that Edgar Schein published in a book called Process Consultation Revisited. I like it because it really helps me understand. I've heard people say, and I know you have too, you need to observe how people walk the talk. That's what authenticity is, people who walk the talk. But from a leadership point of view, when you think about what does it mean to walk the talk, it means that every action that you take is either contributing to the results that you want to create for your organization, or it's distracting from that. So if everything that you do is an intervention, and you start thinking of it that way, then you can begin to be more intentional about making sure your context is aligned. If you want to raise corn, that you've created, the environment that's right for corn to grow. If you want roses, that's something different. You can be consistent in not only the messaging that you give to people, but your demonstration that you value that message. I know a lot of folks in learning functions, they're told, hey, we want you to create contemporary assets. We want you to wow our customers with the training, but the software is 5 revisions old, and we're not really going to train you on it. You just figure out on your own how to use it.
Yeah, that's setting up. That's
Right?
really it's setting up with some inconsistent messaging there.
Well, but it happens all the time. We want you to innovate, but oh my gosh, don't you dare fail. And don't try anything too new, because that's like icky, and we don't want to do that. And the other thing I think about everything you do is an intervention, and it's a little bit different than what we've talked about so far, but it's about being inclusive. And I don't mean inclusive in the sense of just the typical ways we think about diversity and inclusion, but I think about making sure that you're hearing from all the voices that you need to hear from to understand what it is that people need, and that you understand what you need to be doing or providing. In the real sense of being a steward, a farmer walks his fields. They don't just look out the door at the one that's nearest their home. They walk the fields to see the low-lying areas, the high-lying areas. They understand what others are doing. They have to look at all different kinds of information so that when they do make a decision about what they're going to do, they do those things that are important to the environment that they want to create.
And that is so critical for anyone who's trying to lead or use leadership. And what I just heard you say is part of understanding what people need, because what you're trying to do is create an environment where people could be at their best and be the most successful that they can be. I like how you say every action, which is like an intervention, is either contributing towards that or it's distracting from that.
Yes, and I think we've all seen leaders who will sit down at lunch with a group of peers and say one thing and then turn around and from a platform where they're addressing their direct reports or others in the organization, the messaging's quite different.
We need congruency.
We need congruency. To me, that's an authenticity that's really important in contemporary leadership. Some people are not effective just because they're not really thinking about what they're doing. So it's a little bit of not being as intentional or purposeful. And other folks just have different agendas. And so sometimes one agenda shows and sometimes another agenda shows. But, if we're talking about good leadership, I think it's about stewardship and it's about growing something organic. And when you're growing something organic, you need to pay attention to it.
My thanks to Don Snyder. If you'd like to learn more about Don, go to the show notes. Also, if you have a question or comment, go to unlabelleadership.com, click the message icon, and leave a voicemail for up to 1 minute. Maybe I'll play it on the air. I also like to thank you for listening to this show and previous shows. With that, until next time, lead on.